Hi, everybody. I'm here today in part of this Elevating of Jewish Education series with my colleague and friend, Carly Orshan from Miami. And I'm going to get stuck straight into this conversation by asking her to introduce herself. And you're going to see very shortly why I've asked her to be one of the people to appear on this series. So, Carly, over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. I'm excited to be here. I am from Miami, born and raised, and work right now for the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education. We call it SAGE with a soft C in Miami, Florida. At SAGE, I serve as the director of our teen department and supervise some of our direct service projects with the teens in the community, such as Diller Teen Fellows, working on the March of Living, developing all the educational development for that program. And we've also developed the Jewish Life Coaching Certification Program to help professionals, specifically those working with teens in the community, to become coaches and help enhance their mentorship with teens. And we did this in partnership with the Covenant Foundation, which we received a grant for. So that's just a little bit of the work that I'm doing. I'm also getting my PhD in education in curriculum and instruction. So I'm also always looking at how to improve upon and evaluate the programs that we're working on. And so that's a big part of the work that I do and move into the work that I do. Before I came into Jewish education, I was a Jewish yoga instructor and just general yoga instructor. So I come with that background and that hat as well, which especially during these times has been very helpful in everything that's going on.
Great. So we'll talk a bit about that in a few moments. But while I've got you here, I would like to expand the thinking of some of our listeners out there. Tell us a bit about Miami Jewry and Jewish education in Miami, because often we're going to get critiqued. I know that we think of Jewish education taking place on the coast, but I want to talk about Miami because there are some really interesting demographic trends that we see in Miami, which I think are really important for our listeners to know about, partly because I think there actually are, or at least becoming, more normative for what will be Jewish America moving forward. But tell us a bit about Miami for now.
Absolutely. So Miami is a big melting pot, but a heavily Latin community. And that definitely has influenced our Jewish community and our Jewish culture in Miami. So we have three very somewhat diverse communities in Miami that all kind of mesh together and are 20 minutes to an hour apart depending on Miami traffic. And all of those different pockets have representations of immigrant families. We have families from, a lot of families from Israel, a lot of Russian immigrant families, and specifically a lot of families from the Latin community. And that certainly has shaped the way in which we're engaging with them, engaging with the communities. We also have very diverse religious communities, because once we have the Latin communities, many of them self-identify as Orthodox, and they might practice more in what we deem in American Jewry as a conservative way, but they're self-identifying as Orthodox. And so the lines of what Reform, conservative, Orthodox, traditional is in Miami is very much blurred as a result of the melting pot in which we're living.
Okay. So talk to me also a bit about the age spread of the Jewry in Miami. Now, I don't want to cast any stereotypical aspersions here, but I am interested particularly in the role the Holocaust survivor generation does play in Miami, and the way that also plays into your work as a teen educator. You'll be able to make the link pretty clearly for our educators out here, but I want you to just talk a bit about that for a second.
Certainly. So, everyone knows that you come to Miami to retire. So, everyone thinks that we have most of the elderly people. In the last several years, it actually has shifted, and they're not necessarily all in our bucket because they've moved more to Broward, which is just, right on the cusp. But with that being said, we do have a number of Holocaust survivors. And I don't have the exact numbers right now, but we do serve a lot of the Holocaust survivors in the community. that are in Miami-Dade, and even those that are in Broward are, have touch points with our Holocaust Memorial, for example, or even our March of Living program. And we also have some other, leadership programs for, we have one for college students and graduate students at the University of Miami that are partnered with Holocaust survivors. There was actually just a great documentary that was done it's called My Survivor, to showcase the last, I'm forgetting how long they've been doing this program, but quite a while, what that has been for the community, for Jewish and non-Jewish students. And it was actually just broadcasted on our local PBS station last week on Yom HaShoah. So there's that. There's also opportunities for, young teens to get involved. We have a Young Lions program, which bar and bat mitzvah age teenagers get partnered with a survivor in the community, really helping them, learning from them, and so forth. But we are seeing a decline, obviously, in those survivors and in that age demographic. We've also seen quite a large shift. The Jewish community in Miami used to be heavily focused in the South Dade, and now it's moved up very much so into North Miami or Aventura area. And so all of these different shifts and trends are certainly informing the way in which we're educating and how we're thinking about the structure of the demographics.
Okay, so with all of those demographics in the background, those sociological understandings there, how do you see, or what do you see as the purpose of Jewish education when you're trying to educate young people today?
Yeah, so that's a big question. I think that in Jewish education, we're trying to hit on so many different pieces, right? I even touched on a few of them, right? We're trying to connect with survivors and learn from our past. We're trying to understand our Jewish identity with all these different labels and denominations and so forth. And we certainly touch on a lot of that. And I think that is important. But I think above all of that, a lot of our goals, at least certainly my goal, in which we infuse the work that we do, in which we coach other programs on how to infuse their work, is to help really create a space to allow people, specifically teens, to grow and thrive, to help them become, better human beings. If we are not able to be strong individuals, then we can't be strong Jewish individuals. And so a lot of our thinking, almost probably every program that we are doing personally or that we are collaborating with when we're mentoring the professionals in the community, we have this underlying tone, right? How is this going to help these individual teens grow? How is it going to help shape who they are as individuals? What is the purpose of that? And so if it is to match them up with a Holocaust survivor, what is the overall goal with that? How is that going to help shape who they are? And we see it, last week, a teen that went on the march a few years ago, went gloves, masks, everything, head to toe covering, to our 101-year-old Holocaust survivor that she met through the program, to deliver food because he had nothing, right? And she just called him up and was like, do you need anything? And she went. And those are, those moments that I think that we're helping these people engage in society and in their communities in meaningful ways. And that's, the best goal that we can give.
So let me ask this sort of maybe a strange question, but given your background, I think it's an important one. Like some of the things you just said, people or young people could achieve through yoga. They can become better versions of themselves and they can become thriving. And some might argue that yoga is a really, really great way to help people just become in balance with themselves and do what they need to do to be the human beings. And now you've got this Jewish education piece here as well. So like what's the difference, or is there a difference between what you do in yoga and what you do in Jewish education?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely similarities. And certainly in my yoga, it's blurred because I bring in Jewish concepts. But I think, what?
You're confusing me here. All right, go, yeah.
But I think that the difference is that in the work that we're doing, we're helping them to think about how they're going to be good individuals through a Jewish lens. And we are using Judaism as the platform or the catalyst to kind of shed the light on exploring who they are as individuals. And so as opposed to just saying, let's use, the Sanskrit thinking or the Buddhist understanding, we're using what is Judaism saying about being a good person or about supporting each other or about community and, anything in between, even the difficult stuff, like what does Judaism say about, the difficulties that you're having with your friends? A lot of teens struggle with Lashon Hara, right? They're constantly worried about how they're communicating with each other or with, different friend groups and what they're saying. And is this being bad? Is this being okay? What's okay to share? What's not okay? And all of those boundaries. And so I think once we label it and we give it a name that Judaism can foster, we can then talk to them about these very real issues that everybody faces. They're universal, but we can bring it into the particular of, a Jewish concept.
Sorry for pushing you on this, but it's something of real interest to me. Like, what happens if you actually find a better source in Sanskrit or in something else, right? Like, I know you've got this desire to bring this Jewish lens to it, but like, if popular culture has a lyric in a song that's going to help you get there quicker and faster and more resonating with these kids today, are you going to preference the Jewish text or the Jewish value more, or like, how do you play that out?
So it's interesting. And I think I wear two different hats with this. I think it depends on the educator's comfortability and what they're able to do. So the different hats that I wear is sometimes when I'm working directly with teens, which now is not as much as I used to be, I would feel comfortable to push the Jewish framework because of my background, because of where, I'm coming from. And I think that the other hat, when I'm working with professionals in the field, especially younger or newer professionals in the field, they might not have that same comfortability. So a lot of what I'm doing now is giving them both options and giving them, here's side one, right? Here's the beautiful thing that Judaism can say about this. I want you to learn it. I want you to wrestle with it as professionals. I want you to think about it so that you can feel comfortable, hopefully sharing it with the team. But if not, here's the other way of sharing it with the team, right? An example that we've had with that is with we did a project with Dear Evan Hansen. We all went to go see it. We did a tech study on it. And even though we did a tech study, and now I'm forgetting what the text was, I have to pull it up. But it was about, the world being pulled apart in two different sides. On the one hand, you have everything. On the other hand, you don't have anything. And they really wrestled with it. But when I asked them how they may have used this, like when they, 6 months later, they said that they leaned into the song You Will Be Found, and they used the song more than the text. So did it enrich the teens Jewishly? I'm not sure, but it certainly enriched the professionals. And they may have paused when they were sharing it, or maybe they mentioned, Judaism has a source for this, whether or not they used it. And I think that it comes down to the professional and their comfortability.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a whole lot of really important issues. One being that the Jewish education right now might have a scarcity of Jewish educators who are proficient enough in traditional Jewish learning and therefore struggling to convey that to their teens or their youth, which I think is a big problem in general that we might be facing. And I think you're talking about the other broader issues as well, in terms of that these kids are kids, and what resonates with them is what resonates with them. And that's going to be a constant struggle, because what you're not talking about is the inverse, which would be, I think, some form of indoctrination, where you're telling them this is the only way to lead your lives. Let's leave that for now. Let's jump to another area where I think you've touched on. And just to make sure our listeners know, we're recording this actually in the week after Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm particularly interested in your work involved with the March of the Living. what impact you see it having on young people today, what role you think the Holocaust has in the memory and I think actually the future for young people today. Talk a bit about that, and then I want to speak a bit about the pedagogy of the march as well, because I know that's come under some sort of scrutiny as well in the past as well. But tell us your experience about the March of the Living.
Absolutely. So with the March, I've seen, and we've done an evolution with the program. You know, last year we did a huge strategic plan to identify where we can move the program the next 3 to 5 years, mostly looking at, you know, the Gen Now research and thinking about how we are able to, you know, modify the program for teens today. And I think that, you know, in Miami, we were one of the first years that went on, you know, we were the incubator group in 1988 that went on the march, you know, for the US. And I think that, you know, there was certain mottos and certain traditions that were embedded into the program that may not have been the best ways of approaching education for teens. And so we have flipped a lot of the structure and the education. And part of that is that we've learned that we cannot be heavy focused on history and on facts, and really shifting more into emotion, teaching empathy in some capacities. It's really redirecting and kind of going about the education in a way of thinking that maybe these teens probably should have had this education previously, but they're not necessarily there. Of, you know, how do you have dialogue? How do you have conversations? How do you disagree with somebody in respectful ways? You know, and a lot of that happens in a pluralistic community, or, you know, when thinking about the difficulties with Israel, right, and understanding the nuance of Israel. And so a lot of the Holocaust education has actually shifted into conversations about, you know, who am I as an individual? What does that mean for my past? You know, where am I coming from? What does this mean, and how is this going to take me forward? And that forward piece is, you know, how are you going to be Jewish in your life? You know, how are you going to be engaged with Israel? How do you want to advocate for Israel? What does that look like for you? And so a lot of the education has shifted to a more broader education of the march, not just about the Shoah. I think that the Shoah gives us the opportunity to have the conversation and to start thinking about the larger pieces.
Maybe I just take one step back. What's your 30-second pitch about the March of the Living, just so all of our listeners understand? When you say the march, what do you mean when you say the march?
Yeah, the march to me is a 6-month educational program that culminates in 2 weeks, taking seniors in high school. Our group takes only seniors in high school to Poland and Israel during Yom HaShoah in Poland, and we take them to Israel on Yom HaZikaron to commemorate, and Yom HaAtzmaut to celebrate. And so it is all of that combined.
Okay, all right. So obviously this year the march didn't go ahead, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second. But I am interested in this piece where I mean, this is clear in some ways and sensitive in other ways, that what you're talking about describing is a trip or an experience, but it's also a manipulation, right? It's a manipulation of emotion. It's a juxtaposition of places. And what would you say to people who talk about this whole notion of taking these kids from the horrors of Auschwitz to the joy of Israel? Like, what's going on intellectually and emotionally for these kids? And here, I think I should be careful. In educational language, the word manipulation is not necessarily as negative as it might sound in other contexts. We don't like to use it in the same way we don't like to use the word indoctrination. But we all understand that most education, if not all education, has ideological baggage behind it and with it. So therefore, how do you play that sort of scenario out when you're talking about it?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that, you know, instead of this concept of manipulation, I think that we're creating moments. And we're creating opportunities to explore and to feel and to, I think, really connect. So one thing I have the privilege of doing right now, separate from my work with SAGE, is I'm actually doing a qualitative research study on the March of Living from 1988 to 2014. I just finished my 6th interview yesterday. And I mean, I haven't even transcribed everything, but what I do see is that the people that went through the program, and varying in age right now, they're reflecting that it was so pivotal that they had the opportunity to shift from Poland to Israel and learn that it's okay to shift their emotions. And even on the trip itself, they said that one of the best things that they learned from it, and this was a few people, I have to go and really sift through the data, but they said that they were able to learn that it's okay to sing and celebrate, and then it was okay to cry. And I think that that speaks a little bit to our Judaism, right? We have times of deep sorrow and we have times of celebration, even, today, right? Israel knows how to do it best, right? They know from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaTzmaut, they can snap into it. And I think as adults, it can be more difficult for us, but I think for teenagers who are so able to snap in and out of engagement, I mean, we see it with their phones, right? One second they're with us and 1 second they're out. It gives them the permission to explore in a different way and to move in and out. So I think that that's what it provides. It gives them that space.
So this might sound like a somewhat silly or trite question, but is it okay to cry in Jewish education?
As the educator, or?
Okay, the kids. Let's talk about the students for now.
I know, yeah. Yes, and I think it's okay not to. One of the biggest narratives that came out from the march, when I stepped in, the old leadership kept saying, you're going to cry, you're going to feel, you're going to do, and this is going to be transformational. And when I came in, I said, we can't say that this is you will be transformed. Like, we can't zap people and transform them. We also can't zap them and say, you're going to cry. And quite frankly, more and more teens I see year after year are not emoting when they are on the ground. And so it is okay if they do, but it's okay if they don't. And I think that, now we're trying to shift and, talk more about those coping mechanisms in a different way, as opposed to just letting them ride with it. A lot of the research that says, there's trauma associated with bringing, kids to Poland. What is that? What are we doing to them? I think that this is a way to combat that, of really giving them the tools to talk about their emotions.
All right. Well, I'm going to make a massive leap now and talk about the current situation that we're in at the moment. But I really want to focus on, in your case and in some other cases, it's pretty obvious what the changes have been to programming. I've spoken with other people before about things going online and providing social connect. But what do you think is going to be different? Like, coming out of all of this, can you already begin to forecast or begin to make predictions as to how you think Jewish engagement or teen engagement or education might look differently on the other side of all of this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot. And I get stuck on the first piece of meeting with somebody. In Miami, we're a culture of kissing, right? Of hugging, right? Cheek to cheek, or, mouth cheek, right? We have this, way of expressing this, welcoming to other people. And so I keep getting stuck that is going to shift so dramatically. And if our greeting, our first thing, is going to shift, everything is going to unravel, and I think that's a cultural, so it just shows like the cultural change that's going to have to take place. Right before, this all happened, like the week before, we had a board meeting for Sage, and we had told people, we want you to elbow pump, and everyone, and there were several people that said, I'm not doing that. I'm giving hugs, I'm giving my kisses, like defying it. And, because it's so unnatural for our community. So I think in the most basic way, greeting each other, learning how to use, different cues, that's going to shift dramatically. And then I think it's going to really frame how we approach, what we're going to do. If just that basic piece shifts. I think we're going to be planning for programs in a different way so that we can plan for doomsday. Different types of contracts, different thinking through different pieces, I think is something from the programmatic side. And I think one of the biggest pieces is to really figure out how we can show to families and show to the teens and kind of prove to them, and that's not the best word, but that there's value in the experiences that we're providing. There's still value in the Zoom sessions that we're doing with our teens. There's still value in the pre-educational sessions to the March of Living before they go to Poland, right? And, having the parents understand those methodologies, I think is something that we have to think a little bit more about. Now, the nitty gritty of, how many people are going to be in a space and all of that, that's certainly going to change. And, who knows what that looks like. But I think that that's going to be a big piece. And the last one, I think, is shifting how we're engaging with the teens a little bit. I think that we're seeing, and we know that this is a traumatic event for everybody. And, one, can we provide spaces for the parents to help them cope? And two, how can we help the teens? I think that looking at their wellness and who they are is going to be a big piece of the next steps, because who knows what kind of environments they're in now. And everybody's learning from the small environments that they're in, of their families, of how to cope and how to deal with the trauma and how to deal with these ruptures that are going on. And some are in very supportive spaces and some might not be. And so our jobs as educators will probably be to help them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Quite a few people have referenced the role of Jewish educators moving from more of the social, emotional, connective relationship piece of the equation. I'm wondering how much content suffer, or will people finally recognize that the be-all and end-all of education was not the transmission of content, or will there be some sort of disconnect which takes place? And I think some of that's yet to play out. We are running towards time here. I want to ask you two quick questions to try and finish up. What's something that you're reading, Carly, that you think, or you've read, that you think all educators or people involved in education should be looking at?
Yeah, sure. One thing that comes to mind is a book called NeuroTeach. I think it's by Whitman and Keller or Kelman, I'm forgetting. But I think it's really great because it helps to think about how we're teaching to the brain and how the brain is developing. And especially for teenagers, really thinking through that years of 13 to 25, they say, that, how are the responses taking place? And then how can we, I think it's helped me to readjust how the teens can engage with stuff. They're still learning, they're still evolving. And so it's a great book for that.
Don't blame them. It's just their brains haven't fully developed yet.
Correct.
Anyway, good. All right. And finally, is there an educator in your life that you would like to pay tribute to, someone who has influenced you? Here's an opportunity to name them and tell us how they have influenced who you are.
It's so hard for me. I have had so many fantastic educators, but I think that if I could name a group of people, and not formal Jewish educators, even though they may have done some formal Jewish education, it's my family. They taught me about being Jewish and Judaism in such a unique way, and we've all taken paths into the Jewish world in different capacities. My sister's a rabbi, my other sister's a psychologist, my brother's on his way for that, and my mother used to do Jewish song leading. So we've all done different things in that capacity, and given to the Jewish world. And I think that they're kind of my guiding force of being a good human and being a good Jewish human. And so I think that that's the best educating group I could speak to.
So you heard it here first, listeners, on this Elevating Jewish Education series. Stay tuned, for I think there are going to be some dramatic developments and advancements in the field of family education in the Jewish space. I think this became very apparent to many families over Passover, when you weren't able necessarily to outsource your Seder to your cousin or the grandparent, and you were now responsible yourself. And I think we're going to see that ripple effect for a lot of families and really taking seriously what their role is in transmitting of Jewish education and Jewish events and cycles in people's lives. But with that, we have covered so much territory in such a short amount of time. There are so many other things I'd like to be able to talk to you about. Carly can't hear me for these final moments, but it's lucky because I'm just signing off now anyway. So I am going to thank everybody. Thank Carly for everything that she has contributed to today's conversation. And we are going to sign off now. And Carly, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So good to have you, and so good to have Miami in the house. And I look forward to being able to meet with many other Jewish educators from all around the country, if not the world, in short time. Thanks, Carly. Stay safe, stay healthy, and to all of you as well.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.